Good evening, class, and welcome to Lesson 2.7, Interpreting the Remainder. Let's begin by taking a look at our essential question. It says, when solving a division problem, when do you write the remainder as a fraction? Well, let's begin by taking a look at our word problem. Scott and his family went to hike a trail that is 1,365 miles long. They will hike equal parts of the trail on 12 different hiking trips. How many miles will Scott's family hike on each trip? Well, let's take a look at what we need to do to help solve the problem. It says circle the dividend you will use to solve the divisor problem. Well, it says that it is a total of 1,365. So we know that when we are working with the division problem, when we start with our total then becomes our dividend. Then it says that they will hike equal parts because it says to underline the divisor you will use to solve the division problem. Well, they're doing it in equal parts, which lets us know that we will be using division to solve it on 12 different hiking trips. So we know that 12, we're taking our dividend and dividing it into 12 different groups. So our 12 becomes our divisor. When you solve a division problem with the remainder, the way you interpret the remainder depends on the situation and the question. Sometimes you need to use both the quotient and the remainder. You can do that by writing the remainder as a fraction. All right, one way of doing that is to write it as a fraction. So first we're going to divide to find the quotient and remainder. Then we need to look back at our question to decide how to use the quotient and remainder to answer our question. So let's go back to our word problem and look at what our question actually is. It says, how many miles will Scott's family hike on each trip? All right, so we come down to the bottom and it says the divisor represents the number of trips Scott and his family plan to take. The quotient represents the whole number, part of the number of miles Scott and his family will hike on each trip. The remainder represents the number of miles left over. So the remainder represents 9 miles, which can also be divided into 12 parts and written as a fraction. So let's come over here to our division problem and let's take a look. Remember, we have our ones column, our tens column, our hundreds column, and our thousands column. So we have to remember which place value we are going to start with our quotient. So let's take 1 divided by 12. Well, we know we can't do that, so we need to either put an X or a 0 in our thousands place value. So then it leaves us with 13 divided by 12. Well, we know we can do 13 divided by 12 one time, and we place our 1 in our hundreds column. 1 times 12 is 12, and 13 minus 12 leaves us with 1. So now we need to work on our tens column by bringing down our 6. So now we have 16 divided by 12. And again, we know that can go one time. 1 times 12 is 12. And 16 minus 12 is 4. Well, we still have our ones column that we need to work with. So we bring down our 5. And that's 45 divided by 12. Well, we know that we can get close to that without going over by multiplying 12 times 3, which equals 36. we need to take our 15 and a 3. 15 minus 6 leaves us with 9. Okay? Now, 9 becomes our remainder of 9. But we need to see how we need to use that remainder. And if we come back over, it says the remainder represents 9 miles, which can also be divided into 12 parts and written as a fraction. So we start with our remainder. Our remainder now becomes our numerator. And if we look over here, we see that 9 is our remainder, which then becomes our numerator. So we have our numerator of 9, and then our divisor, which is right here, then becomes our denominator. So we end up with a fraction of 9/12. So now it says to write the quotient with the remainder written as a fraction in simplest form, which means that we need to find our common multiple for these two. So then if we come to the bottom and we list, not our common multiples, common factors, so that we can find it in simplest form, if we take our 9 and our 12, we know the factors of 9 is 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. So if we do our factors of 12, that's 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So if we now compare our factors of 9 to our factors of 12, we see that our greatest factor that is the same for both is going to be the 3. So then to find our fraction written in simplest form for 9/12, we would take 9/12 and divide both the numerator and the denominator by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So 9/12 written in its simplest form then becomes 3/4. So to answer our question, Scott and his family will hike, and that is 113 and 3/4 miles on each trip, and that goes in that blank. All right, let's look at another way that we can use the quotient. It says, the segment of the Appalachian Trail that runs through Pennsylvania is 232 miles long. Scott and his family want to hike 9 miles each day on the trail. How many days will they hike exactly 9 miles? So now it's asking us, we have to think about it differently. How many days will they hike exactly 9 miles? So we have our 232, which is our ones column, our tens column, and our hundreds column, our dividend of 232, and our divisor of 9, because they're going to do a total of 232 miles, hiking the same amount for 9 miles for the same number of days. So let's begin dividing. So if we look at our hundreds column, we have a 2. 2 divided by 9. Well, we know we can't do that, so we need to put a 0 or an X in our hundreds column. Now, if we look at our next number, that leaves us with 23. 23 divided by 9, well, we know that we can multiply 9 2 times without going over 23, because 2 times 9 equals 18. And 23 minus 18 equals 5. Now that leaves us with our ones column, so we have to bring down our ones. And 52 divided by 9, well, we know we can multiply 9 by 5 without going over 52. And 5 times 9 is 45. 12, 4, 12 minus 5 is 7. So we have a remainder of 7. So now let's look at what it says. So we have to divide the quotient and the remainder, which is what we just did. Since the remainder shows that there are not enough miles left for another 9-mile day because our remainder is only 7. 7 is less than 9. It is not used in the answer. So they will hike exactly 9 miles on each of, and we're just going to use our quotient. So our answer would be on each of 25 days. Now, another way is to add 1 to the quotient, or 1 to our answer. So what is the total number of days that Scott will need to hike 232 miles? Well, since we know that he's going to hike 25 days, but he wants to do it all, since we have a remainder there, we have to add 1 to our quotient. So instead of just 25 days to cover 232 miles, he's going to need 25 plus 1, which gives us 26 days to hike 232 miles. Now, the last way that we need to look at it is to use the remainder as the answer. So if Scott hikes 9 miles each day except the last day, how many miles will he hike on the last day? Well, that's where our remainder comes in, because on that 26th day, we need to figure out how many miles he will hike, since he's not hiking 9 miles. And the way that we find that out is to use our remainder. So Scott will hike 7 miles on the last day. So now, let's take a look at our try this problem. Down at the bottom, it says a sporting goods store is going to ship 1,252 sleeping bags. Each shipment carton can hold 8 sleeping bags. How many cartons are needed to ship all of the sleeping bags? And that's one of our key words right there. We need to know shipping all of them, not just what our quotient is going to be. So let's work our problem out, and let's figure out how many cartons are going to be needed to ship all of the sleeping bags. So we've got 12 divided by 8 is 1. 1 times 8 is 8. 12 minus 8 is 4. We now bring down our tens column, and that leaves us 45 divided by 8. Well, we know that we can multiply by 5 to get 40, which does not go over our 45. So we put our 5 in the tens column. 5 times 8 is 40. 45 minus 40 leaves us with 5. We bring down our 2 for our ones column, which leaves us with 52. 52 divided by 8, well, we know that we can multiply 8 by 6, which gives us 48. 48 does not go over our 52, so we put our 6 in the ones column. 6 times 8 is 48. Then a 12, make that a 4, and that leaves us with a remainder of 4. So come back over here. Since there are 4 sleeping bags left over, we are going to need 156 to contain those, but with 4 left over, we are going to need 1 more carton. So we will need a total of 157 cartons in order to successfully ship all of the sleeping bags. All right, guys, You need to get out your math journals. You can pause the video at this point to take your notes into your math journals. Hopefully this makes it a little easier to understand, and we will do some more practice tomorrow in class. See you then. Have a good evening.